I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hornady Podcast. I'm your host, Seth, and today I'm bringing a panel to discuss 2025 new products. And on this episode, the big little cartridge, the 338 ARC. Guys, this thing, impossibly quiet, impossibly small, with an impossibly giant bullet that's capable of so much. This thing has been one of the funnest things I've shot in a long time. And you guys, obviously, you've had your hand in this for a long time. We're going to talk about the whole history, but the initial excitement about the 338 ARC, I mean, it makes you smile when you shoot it. It's just flat fun. And the Hornadys, Jason and Steve, they've always been adamant about, we sell fun.
Yeah.
Well, this is fun. This is fun. And you guys have had the chance to shoot it a bunch. Tell me just some wave tops about what you've enjoyed about the 338 ARC before we get into the technical descriptions here.
Well, when you look at the cartridge, like you said, it doesn't fit into anything we expect in centerfire rifle cartridges, right? Like you have this massive bullet hanging out the front of it. There's almost as much bullet hanging out the front as there is case behind it.
Yeah. It's a caricature, really, of if you just had a cartridge set up and then you paid the guy at Worlds of Fun to draw a caricature of a cartridge, that's what it would come out like.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The rubber meets the road, though, when you shoot it. Like the performance that thing has, you would not expect it by looking at it. And you would also not expect it on paper. Because when you talk about the subsonic performance world, things aren't as different as they are similar. You know, the difference, the velocities are all static, right? You have to be subsonic, so that truncates everything to a certain performance level.
Right. And before we get there, we really try to target 1050 to 1075 to really guarantee, based on different barrel and throat geometries and wherever you're at in the world, you're still going to be below the speed of sound.
That's right.
So yeah, the velocities are static across the board.
Yeah. But the performance this thing has, both on target and terminally, it's got the sub-X bullet, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but
of course,
I think people will be pleasantly surprised when they get their hands on this thing.
I think so too. Joe, how do you feel about it?
Two biggest takeaways that I took the first time that I shot the subload out of a short little AR-15 was, number one, the accuracy and consistency of it. We were shooting a plate at 200 yards off a tripod with a sub, which normally is a challenge, right? Just because of EVs and stuff.
Yeah, which we'll talk about.
You could shoot that plate on command. And the other thing that I noticed was shooting a big IPSC target, how much more authority that it had when the bullet got to the target, how hard it hit that plate. You would think, okay, 190 grain 30 cal to a 307 grain bullet. Yeah, that's quite a bit. But in supersonic world, you're not going to be able to tell how much harder it's hitting the plate. But by golly, with subs, you can watch the reaction of the plate, the audible difference of it. So yeah, I was really impressed with consistency and accuracy, velocities, all those, and then energy on target. There's two biggest things that hit me right away.
And you can see the energy. That's a really great point. When you look at something like a 6.5 PRC and you compare it to something like, say, a 270 Winchester, or let's say a 7 PRC. Okay, well, the 7 PRC's got substantially more energy than a 6.5 PRC. Well, if you hang a piece of steel at 300 yards or 200 yards, it both looks like a hand grenade went off on the piece of steel, right? It smacks them both. When you slow things down to the same velocity, and you can see that the more energy, 1.5 times more energy in this case, you can see and hear the difference.
Absolutely.
And that is pretty cool. And you were talking about shooting that steel at 200 yards. Yeah, you can shoot a piece of steel at 200 yards, standing from a tripod, and hit it every time you pull the trigger, and then eventually break the target, which is what happened at the event I think you're talking about. That's saying something. And so when you transfer that performance into the hunting world, things get really fun. Especially throw the suppressor on there, and you get terminal performance it's impossible. There's no way it's that effective on a deer or a black bear or a pig when it's that quiet, that slow. Like, there's just no way. But the proof's in the pudding. It absolutely is that effective. And for the listener, I know the large majority of you are going to consume this podcast before you can actually go buy the product. There's going to be barrels and guns shipping as we come into 2025, and certainly as we turn the corner into the new year, there'll be ammo shipping as well. As we fill that pipeline, though, just know, if you're listening to this early, this is one of those that you're going to want to get your hands on. You're going to want to shoot it, and once you pull the trigger, once you shoot pigs or shoot a deer with it, you're going to go, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I've been missing out.
This shouldn't be this much fun.
Yep. Yeah, it does. It feels like you're doing something wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Before this devolves into just ramblings about how awesome it is, I love to give the listener a really good look at the 338 ARC and any cartridge really on the how, the why, and the what. So we really have to rewind the clocks quite a ways for this, which, to shock the listener, of the ARC family, the 6, the 22, and now the 338, the 338 is the first ARC development from Hornady. It predates the 6 and it predates the 22, which is pretty unusual that this sat on the shelf for that long, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But let's go back into 2017. What propagated, hey, maybe we should do something with a really giant bullet in this really tiny case. What propagated that? How did that development look? And then what happened in the interim that it just kind of sat around?
Yeah, well, in similarity to the 6 ARC story and its relation to the DoD, the 338 ARC was kind of had its beginnings there. We were working with some groups that we work with pretty often, and they essentially came to us and said, hey, here's the problem we have. We don't have a good tool to address it. I can't really go into detail of what specifically they needed or were looking for, but the tools that they had at their disposal at that time period were not sufficient. And so we started messing around with stuff. And yeah, like you said, that was what became the initial offering of the 338 ARC in its infancy, was to really increase the subsonic performance, and specifically the terminal performance and hit probability, your ability to actually hit the target at longer than traditional ranges for subsonic ammo use.
50, 75 yards, 100 yards, you were looking to go double or triple that.
2, 3, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that time, the requirements, I guess you could say, were substantial enough that we started making stuff and testing stuff, and it was looking pretty good. But then the conversation kind of quieted down a little bit. I think there was a shift in attention to some other areas. You also see around that time the 6 ARC development starting. And it just kind of sat on the shelf for a little while. We weren't finalized with the development. We didn't know exactly how much we could get out of the design at that point. It was kind of in some early stages where it's like, well, this is certainly showing promise, but we haven't given it the full effort to see how good it can get. The attention dropped off from the project for a while, and then it resurfaced itself again.
Yeah.
Probably 2 years ago.
Okay.
And so we really started concentrating on that again. And it's actually a good thing that kind of lull happened, because we learned a lot about what we could do with the subsonic projectile to increase the performance above and beyond what we already had in that era, which was the early Sub-X design.
Yeah, I was going to say it had a Sub-X from the get-go. It was huge. Now, the weight was something different, and I'm sure the internal geometry was something different, but that's a great point. I'll let you finish what you're saying, but I want to highlight the fact that we've always said we're going to let the bullet do the work. If you look at our cartridge designs, they're not, look at our PRCs. There are faster cartridges out there. We don't need to be the fastest. We need to be the most consistent. We're going to let that bullet do the work downrange, and it sounds like that's exactly the thought mentality that went right here.
That's exactly it. Yeah, we had made some bullets. They were 315 grains back in 2016 or whatever it was.
Long time ago.
Yeah, and they performed well. They essentially used that same technology that like the 190 Sub-X did. It was a scaled up version essentially of that. Well, as you fast forward, we've made some advances where when this kind of started to get more attention again from DoD, we said, well, maybe we don't want to go with that 2016 bullet. Let's see if we can improve it at all. And we absolutely did. And so that's what's now the 307 grain Sub-X.
So in between here and there, though, this is sitting on the shelf. It was sitting on the shelf for about a year or so, and then the 8.6 blackout kind of came into development, and that was something that people seem to have wanted. That would have been 2019 timeframe, I think, 2018 maybe. And that was when the initial development happened. And then in 2020, you see the release of our 6 ARC. And I feel like the 6 ARC really helped pave the way for what we're talking about today, the 338 ARC, and its adoption, if you will, by the masses of gun and barrel manufacturers. And so the 6 ARC, I think that if it wasn't for the 6 ARC, I don't think we'd have the 22 or the 338, even though the 338 had already really had its initial design. I think the 6 forced the industry to catch up with bolts and magazines.
Mags. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the performance advancements of that cartridge and what it gave you in an AR-15, I think you couldn't turn a blind eye to it. It was such a jump in performance from any standard AR-15 cartridge. A 5.56 or blackout really is a different thing. You're not going to have long-range, high-efficiency performance out of that. But yeah, it kind of broke that mold and said, oh, wow. And you've seen, that cartridge has found a lot of success. And I mean, we make it all the time, so there's a lot of demand out there. And in that advancement of the performance out of the AR-15 in the supersonic realm with the 6 ARC and then later the 22 ARC, one of the beautiful things about the AR-15 platform is that you're able to run supersonic and subsonic cartridges in it. Yeah, you might want to swap the cartridge. A lot of people out there will run a 5.56 upper for most of their supersonic stuff, historically. And then they have a 300 blackout upper or maybe an entirely different rifle, but it's the same system. They're both AR-15s. And you haven't really seen that before. Prior to that, you essentially had subguns, so like suppressed 9mm or 10mm or 40s, whatever it may be, and then you had supersonic carbines. But the AR-15 allowed for the conglomeration of those two types of performance into one platform.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we take that platform and we advance its performance via the cartridge in the 6 ARC or the 22 ARC, you left all that subsonic performance back with those legacy cartridges. And so the 338 ARC really, I see its future as the kind of symbiotic relationship that we've had historically between 5.56 and 300 blackout, but with the increased performance of 6 ARC or 22 ARC and the increased performance of 338 ARC.
Yeah, all in the wonderfully ergonomic platform of the AR-15 or a super short little bolt action rifle. And that's pretty cool. And with the 6 ARC paving the way, I mean, that's DOD, that's law enforcement, that's coyote hunter, that's prairie dog shooter, that's deer hunter, antelope hunter. I mean, that little cartridge is incredibly versatile, especially in an AR-15 platform. Introduced a 22 ARC, which is, I mean, the 6 ARC wasn't a slow burn. It took a little while to really get that traction. 22 ARC came out of the gate with traction. So we saw rapid magazine introductions. That there's a ton of AR magazines now that are going to run those, purposefully built to run those ARC rounds. The number of companies that will have a ARC or Grendel bolt face for their ARs and even in their bolt guns, that increased dramatically, which has been great. And then throw in there that suppressors. Back in 2017, if you bought a suppressor capable of handling 338, there's a good chance that thing was a foot long and 2 inches in diameter because it could handle a 338 Lapua.
Right.
Well, now you've got all these suppressors getting shorter, smaller, lighter that can handle these low pressure 338 rounds. The 46M, the Silencer Central Banish 46. There's a bunch of them out there that can handle this stuff, and they're small, they're compact,
lightweight,
easier to get now more than ever. So the stage was really set to introduce the 338 ARC or any other ARC cartridge for that matter, just because of the auxiliary components that go into it, which is pretty cool to see such a rapid change chasing performance. And it's been fun to watch, to say the least, because it wasn't mainstream that long ago. You couldn't go just buy a Grendel. There wasn't that many Grendels out there. And then the 6 ARC, okay, that made some paved some way, and then the 22 ARC. And then it just set the stage for 338 ARC. Now, the 338 ARC stands on its own 2 feet regarding terminal performance and consistency. And I want to talk first about the consistency of 338 ARC and subsonic as a whole. Because just like we talked about 7 PRC or 300 PRC, if you're trying to shoot a target far away, which in the PRC world is measured in miles sometimes, velocity spread is king, because your bullet's hanging out in the air for a long time, and your velocity spread's high, you're going to have lots of vertical dispersion. Well, the exact same thing is true in subsonic, but just amplified, and the range is shortened quite a bit. So the 338 ARC really is the most efficient subsonic cartridge out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Even compared to 300 Blackout, I mean, during the development process, testing different primers and different propellants and all of that, trying to figure out, characterize everything, what does this thing look like? That system is so efficient in comparison to the 300 Blackout that we see standard deviation, as a velocity metric that kind of gives you an idea of how good this stuff is going to perform moving forward. And it's a performance leap. It's a different system. It's not just another subsonic cartridge. Readily getting standard deviation numbers less than 10 on 30-shot strings,
which is impressive regardless of cartridge.
Right.
Correct.
But with subsonic, to your point, it's incredibly important because as you reduce the velocities, your average velocity that it's producing, your time of flight to a given distance is going to be longer. To your point, the longer the bullet's in the air, the more vertical you can have on target because of how fast it started, the muzzle velocity. And so when back to the original intention of this thing, it was to take subsonic performance and push the envelope downrange beyond what was achievable at that time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get the velocity. The velocity is the king of all your capabilities, and you have to drive those standard deviations as low as possible.
Yeah, well, it certainly does that. And if I'm not mistaken, the 300 Blackout early on, that was a supersonic cartridge. That was just a small AR-15 30 cal that was primarily built for supersonic. And the subsonic performance kind of came afterwards because there was really no expanding bullet options, B and the D.
Yeah,
So,
there certainly was no expanding bullets.
No, not in subs early on.
So the drive for that performance in a 300 Blackout, although it's at a all-time high today, wasn't designed with that intent, where the 338 ARC designed specifically for that intent. And I think that obviously shows, especially when you shoot it and you shoot groups at 100, 200, 250 yards and you see the capability, that stands, like I said earlier, that stands on its own 2 feet. Just the consistency
Absolutely.
and the performance of it is unrivaled in the subsonic world.
Well, when was it? It had to be in 15 or 16, because I still have some of the original drawings on my computer that when we started out with the whole thing kind of like, hey, here's the concept, we need a different tool in our toolbox. That's the first thing, I know that's the first thing you and I did, was we sat down and did volume. How much volume is it? How much is in the case? How much does the bullet intrude into the case? What's the bore volume? That's the first thing we did. We compared it to Blackout. We compared it to the metrics that we had and then modeled it as best we could and did those calculations to get, because I remember you saying, look, if all else fails, this thing has to be consistent with propellants that we can make for subs.
Yes, and
have to get consistent velocity. End of story.
And that was at the time when we were working on some propellant development that ended up resulting in some subsonic propellants that we use that really changed the performance metric compared to legacy stuff that was available. And luckily, those two timelines came together at the same time.
They converged nicely.
They did, but you still had concerns with pressure levels that it ran at, all of those things where you already knew what the shortcomings were of what was out there. And you said, we need to fix this, we need to fix this, and we need to fix this in order to achieve the levels of performance that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I know that was my first charter or working on the project.
The Hornady CX Copper Alloy Expanding Bullet. CX bullets feature the advanced heat shield tip that resists aerodynamic heating and provides a consistently high BC. Hard-hitting and deep penetrating, CX bullets are constructed of rugged monolithic copper alloy that retains 95% or more of their original weight for devastating terminal performance. Available in factory-loaded ammunition as well as component bullets for reloaders. CX bullets from Hornady.
One of the things that we're going to talk about consistency is in comparison to 300 Blackout, is the pressure that it operates at. And I think this is a huge point that needs to be made for the 300 Blackout shooter. There's a bunch of us out there. I'm one of them.
I'm still one.
Yeah,
Me too.
The 300
Absolutely.
Blackout subsonic is fun. 300 Blackout supersonic, that's fun too. So when you're, okay, well, I have these two options now for subsonic use. Why would I just choose the 338 just because it's a heavier bullet? A little bit more nuanced than that. Love to hear your guys' take specifically on subsonic and supersonic performance and how that pressure balances out when you compare the Blackout to the 338.
Yeah. So pressure-wise on subsonic 300 Blackout, kind of legacy stuff, generally the max chamber pressure that you're going to see kind of across the subsonic, spectrum of different bullets and, manufacturers and stuff is somewhere in the realm of kind of high teens to low 30,000 pound range.
Okay.
Well, I think we've
call it 25,000 pound average.
Sure. Yeah. Mid 20s. I think we've talked about in the propellant podcast that one of the driving metrics of how a propellant burns is the pressure that it's under at that point in its, transition from a solid into a gas. At those lower pressures, it can be more inconsistent. Not saying it will be, right? You have plenty of low pressure cartridges out there that produce very good velocity spreads. But if you can increase those pressures, that generally will help it burn more consistently and more completely, especially as you get to really, really short barrels. So you contrast that, say, 25,000 pounds of chamber pressure that you see with a subsonic Blackout, and you look at subsonic 338 arc, those numbers are in the high 30s, low 40s. So you have significantly more pressure generation. I think that's one of the contributing factors to the lower standard deviation, among some other things.
Sure.
And then in the supersonic world, the two supersonic cartridges are quite similar. 300 Blackout is operating in the low 50,000 pound range, and 338 arc is the same. So the arc family of cartridges is capped at 52,000.
So it generally operates in the upper 40s, usually 48 to 50,000, I think, is where a lot of our stuff is spec'd.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And so one of the unique things about those two relationships is I'm sure many listeners will have had a 300 Blackout that they've built. Maybe they bought a barrel and they're going to throw a gas tube and a gas block on it and build the whole thing themselves. And when they get done with it, supersonics, it's looking good. Ejection pattern looks good. It doesn't look like the system's overgassed. And then they put subsonics in it and it won't pick up the next round, or the bolt won't lock back or something. Mm-hmm. And so then they maybe get an adjustable gas block and get a barrel that has a bigger port. And they're trying to merge those two extremes, 50,000 pounds and 25,000 pounds. And it's difficult to do. It can be done, right? There's plenty of Blackouts out there that will run supers and subs, suppressed and unsuppressed.
But not all of them. So the unique thing, and something we set out to fix, but not as like a design criteria, right? It was kind of like this would be nice if, was that the operating pressures and the gas volumes generated by the 338 arc were much more similar between the super and the subsonic. And we definitely achieved that. I mean, your delta between those two is on the order of 10 to 15,000 pounds difference between subs and supers on your max pressure. And then when you look at Blackout, you're talking 30, 40,000 pounds sometimes difference. So it's much easier to get a system to operate effectively, suppressed, unsuppressed, supers, and subs. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
That's huge. I mean,
Yeah, it's consistency, and it's easy. I can put together my AR, throw my suppressor on there or not, run supers or not, and just have a gun that's going to run consistently. And then one of the biggest things that I enjoy, having shot 300 Blackout suppressed quite a bit, and I know our listeners have shot a ton of it, is the harvesting of corn that takes place in your chamber with 300 Blackout subsonic. You mentioned that incomplete propellant burn. Well, that incomplete propellant burn turns those little propellant chunks yellow, and it looks like there's little kernels of corn floating around inside your chamber. That's annoying. It's gunky. You do have to clean it out of there, and that's just unburnt propellant.
Yeah, and you can't really get around that because you can't increase the pressure so that the powder burns better, because when you increase pressure, velocity increases. Now you're breaking the speed of sound. Now it's not subsonic anymore.
It's a circle.
Yeah. Yeah, you're really hamstrung by this one thing, and there's all these negative trade-offs, and you're exactly right. That's another thing that would be a nice to have in the design criteria, was if we can get this thing to burn very clean subsonically, that would be great.
Well, mission accomplished. Joe and I took this out to a media event. We shot a full case of ammo in about 2.5 hours. Broke a steel target at 200 yards, impressed everybody that shot it, and had no yellow unburnt propellant to clean out. It really was. I was blown away. That was my first heavy use of the cartridge, and I was pretty impressed.
That's a good testament, because that subsonic 338 load is loaded with the same type of powder that we loaded in 300 Blackout subsonic. they're not exactly the same, but they're essentially from the exact same family.
Yeah, same chemistry family.
Yes. And so you would expect that it would be just as dirty
Sure.
as the other one, and it's not because the pressures are higher.
I like it.
I like the consistency in ejection and feeding and picking up the next round, locking back on an empty mag. Zero. I'm telling you, zero feeding functioning issues.
Well, there was some issues at that event. A lot of issues where people would shoot the first shot and then look at the ejection port
Yeah, well-
and assume there was a malfunction because there's no way.
Because it was so smooth picking them up.
Yeah, there's no way it was that smooth, that quiet, and that low recoil. The gun didn't cycle. Obviously, I got to fix this.
I forgot about.
And they
about
dropped the
having
mag and
Really?
ripped the charging handle and go,
absolutely.
oh,
And spit out a round.
yeah,
That's funny.
No, it's
Yeah.
working. It's working just fine.
yeah. And it ran like that, like a skin cat for as many people as wanted to shoot, as many rounds as they wanted to shoot. It just ran. And that's in the AR world. In the bolt gun world, solid lockup bolt, you want to talk about movie quiet.
That's my favorite, is the bolt gun. And I've done a lot of testing with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's significantly quieter than a gas gun. I mean,
course.
gas gun's quiet, but this thing is. So maybe a funny story there. We had a friend, we'll say his name is Cole.
Okay.
He's from another company in the industry that we know well and work with. And he was passing through and stopped in to see us. And we happened to be testing a bolt gun 338 arc. And we're sitting there and he's like, hey, what's that? And this company that he works for was kind of involved. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like we had to
NDA
keep
or
things-
nothing.
Yeah. And like, oh, we're shooting that thing. I think you guys helped us with some stuff on it. Like, oh, yeah. Can I shoot it? I said, yeah, sure. So he lays down and he shoots it. And he comes off of the, so we're sitting at like a sitting table rest, right? And he comes off the gun real slow. And then he turns his head real slow up over his shoulder to look at me. And he goes, are you serious? I was like, yeah, do it again. And he shot all my test ammo. I had to reload the whole batch because he wouldn't stop. And he's like, this is ridiculous. You're costing me money here.
Yeah, I think that same guy texted me a couple days ago and asked if he could get some brass.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is true.
Utilize your space your way with the modular Hornady Security Square Lock Organizing System. Mount the Square Lock panels anywhere in your home or shop. Then attach the wide assortment of Square Lock accessories to securely store firearms, tools, gear, or any other valuables in any possible configuration. Keep your reloading bench or gun room organized with the Square Lock Modular Organizing System from Hornady Security.
It's a lot of fun. Kind of shifting over to the terminal performance side of it, because this is not just a fun plinking cartridges, although it is fun. This is a actual you can hunt with this cartridge. But regardless of just about what animals you can shoot, I want to talk about twist rate, because that's in the subsonic 338
That's a big deal.
or a 338 world, not just the arc, but we need to talk about the twist rate, because that is one of the big points of contention here with, let's say, the 8.6 Blackout. So you designed this bullet specifically to operate for great terminal performance, but that terminal performance can also be influenced by the twist rate. So introduced to Sammy, the 338 arc is a 1 in 8 twist. Yeah, for the real world.
For all those people there, an 8 twist in 338 is fast.
Yes.
Really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it'll work down to a 10 twist. I wouldn't go slower than a 10.
Yeah.
A 10's going to be completely sufficient with both the 307 sub X and the 175 hollow point down to around negative 20 degrees at sea level. That's going to encompass the majority of people's shooting. But yeah, we introduced it with an 8 twist because we found that was the sweet spot that allowed us to take that 307 grain sub X and get it to perform terminally exactly like we wanted. So to your point, well, why would there be all these different twist rates out there? And why do we see the 8.6 Blackout that's been out here for a couple of years with super, super fast twist rates? Well, your twist rate has a direct relation to how fast the bullet expands. So it's the bullets are designed to expand with a certain mechanism usually. Ours is typically a tip or exposed lead, whatever that may be. And that piece of the bullet is what initiates the expansion, makes it start to open. And then from there, as it's traveling through that media, it causes it to completely expand and come to its final dimensions as an expanded mushroomed bullet. Well, as you go to faster and faster twist rates, what happens is the rate at which the bullet expands happens much more rapidly. And that can be attractive to some levels because it takes your temporary wound channel and it makes it larger earlier. But you can take it too far, and you can take it to the point where the bullet can't handle that. As it starts to open, it's spinning so fast that it essentially flings itself open so rapidly that you start to lose, say, jacket petals that are designed to expand and hold a large frontal area for, distribution of energy into the terminal media to create that terminal wound channel. And on this very slow side of it, you can also control it that way, right? If you go to a really, really slow twist rate, you're going to delay some of how fast that bullet opens, because the way it opens is a function of how fast it's going, the material that it's encountering, and the rate that it's rotating at. And what we saw with the 8.6 Blackout was that they were really pushing these super fast twist rates under the concept that it gave you attractive wound channels, which it does to an extent, but it also uses pre-existing bullets that are available on the market, and none of those were really designed for that level of RPMs, the twist rate that produces. And so, yeah, you can get some pretty good wound channels, but a lot of times those bullets aren't working as designed. And there's probably been some now developed for that cartridge that try to optimize that twist rate.
Sure, monolithic bullets for sure.
Sure, yeah. But that kind of takes us down another road there for a second, that typically you don't want to use a monolithic in a subsonic load because generally they don't shoot as good for groups. That bullet won't obturate. It's very, very hard. And so we see that trend. You can certainly get them to shoot good, but I would say in general, if you sampled across a bunch of barrels and a bunch of bullets, you're going to see that a cup and core bullet will shoot better subsonically.
Interesting.
And then, so to add on that, you're right. You can build a bullet to work in a 1 and 3 and 5 twist. You can, but then it doesn't work anywhere else.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
So the trade-off, it's a double-edged sword.
You're basically just backing yourself into a corner. This works in this niche, and that is it. And we can't do that with the partners that we work with, that their landscape in which they operate is very wide, right? So they got to have a tool that
has
works
to work
here
for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and
not to mention integrity issues, accuracy issues. You're spinning them so hard that tiny little imperfections, whether it's bullet, barrel manufacturing, whatever, now you just exacerbate that.
Yeah.
And it's not consistent anymore, right?
Well, yeah, the last thing you want is to blow a bullet up in flight. That's annoying, especially if it happens inside your suppressor.
Yes.
Yeah. Which has happened.
And I specifically know of one guy that I saw it happen to. I saw his suppressor. It ruined it. But I did some testing with it without a suppressor because I didn't want to ruin it, just to see how likely is it that somebody out there is going to encounter this. And I think a lot of people will want to shoot a lead core bullet out of it, especially if you're just plinking, because the cost is lower on a lead core bullet.
Sure it is.
The material costs of making a bullet, that copper jacket is a significant amount of cost in the overall bullet. So when you make the whole bullet out of it, it's more expensive. But yeah, I had bullets that I'm pretty convinced that they were compromised in the barrel, because running the radar, we can essentially measure this. And I had bullets fragmenting out of the muzzle, which concerned me.
Absolutely.
It could be a safety concern for a guy that doesn't expect that to happen or doesn't know that's going to happen. If he has any perpendicular surfaces just downrange of where he is, maybe his muzzle's completely clear of them, but you could have some frag bouncing around from that. So, and to Joe's point, when we design things, we generally try not to design something so narrowed into a corner that the only time you get the performance as designed is if you check these 15 boxes,
right?
Because that's not realistic in the real world. There's variability out there. There's differences in application. People are going to stretch the limits. They're going to try to do something with it wasn't intended to. And when you do that, it's now a safety concern, that's a bit concerning.
Yeah, it is. I agree. And then, the 8.6 really created a lot of interest in subsonic hunting, and for good reason. It is a blast to shoot. I know we've all shot them. They're fun because it's subsonic. But one of the things that 338 ARC really has going for it, we've talked about it before, it's in a small frame, micro bolt action. It's in an AR-15. Well, with the 8.6 Blackout being essentially a Creedmoor case, you're in an AR-10 size platform. So you get a heavier gun that has heavier and bigger features, less ergonomic, but the performance is still 1050 at the muzzle, and there's no benefit to the bigger gun or the heavier gun other than
not when you go sub.
Yeah,
and it's an inconsistent 1050. Case is too big.
And that's kind of where I was going with that. You have that big case. Well, if you're capped at 1050 and you don't fill the case, what happens there if you have that big air column with that low charge weight?
Yeah, it's generally not the goal if you're trying to achieve efficiency, because if that propellant is in different positions in relation to the primer within the cartridge case, when it's ignited, generally you see a difference in velocity and pressure. Now you can get consistent performance with too much case capacity, but it's harder to do. There's probably going to be one primer and one powder and one bullet combination that gives you good results, and a bunch of different ones that give you really bad results. And so that's kind of another downside we see, is that the 8.6 Blackout really comes from components being available, right? To your point, like the Creedmoor case. There's one or two of those around.
I've seen a few.
So if you just modified that case that's so prevalent out there, and
which
get
makes
it up
sense,
to
honestly.
get it up to 338, launch it subsonically, that's a giant jump in performance, over Blackout or anything we've talked about, which the 8.6 certainly achieved in its kind of heyday there of the last couple of years. But at the same time, you saw the sensitivity start to come out. Oh, I can't get it to load consistently, my velocity variability is all over the map, but I can do this one thing and get it to work. Oh, if I want to shoot a supersonic load out of it, because the case does have quite a bit more capacity.
It does, yeah, that'd be great for hunting.
Now you're running into bullet integrity issues with the twist rates that come
twist
along.
rate.
So it's I view it kind
literally
of as
500,000 RPMs.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Literally.
Yeah, we say nothing good happens after midnight or over 300,000 RPMs. Yeah, that's quite a bit. It's kind of I would call it like a tweener cartridge. Like the cartridge case capacity is not enough to be desirable for supersonic performance, but it's too much for subsonic. It's not optimized in a simple phrase.
And I like it that the 338 arc, run the temperatures up, run the temperatures down. Guess what? Performance is still consistent, still there. You do that with those larger cases. Temperature changes 40 degrees on you. Oh man, doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work as good.
Or you get hang fires. When you have a lot of room in the case like that with air, you don't have a very high charge weight. Yeah, if you start shooting really cold temps, you can start to get some hang fires to happen, which can be dangerous.
Yeah, but absolutely.
That's why you design it eloquently and properly, and works in all those landscapes.
Yep.
Look at this. 100 free bullets when I buy these select Hornady reloading tools. Wow, 500 free bullets with certain Hornady reloading presses and kits. Well, what do they have? Let's get loaded.
There's no better time to stock your reloading bench. Choose from the most durable, precise, and convenient tools on the market and receive free bullets to get you loaded. Visit Hornady.com for further details.
Next time we get loaded, I'm buying.
Well, and I think that's the biggest takeaway for the Hornady fans, and maybe not even fans, just the Hornady followers that have witnessed the evolution of cartridge design, starting with 17 HMR and 6.5 Creedmoor to present day. We release stuff that has been well thought out, tested, verified, and actually meant to work because of the specific design intent, and this is another great example. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about subsonic performance because that's exactly what it was designed for. But we do have a complimentary offering in factory ammo in the black line that we wanted to do supersonic for some variety. There's going to be people out there that, hey, I'm shooting pigs at night, or I'm just out here banging steel, and they want a little flatter trajectory, and they're not worried about the supersonic crack. So we should talk about that 175 grain hollow point in our black line.
Yeah, it in the way that you have kind of the 110-ish grain bullet class in 300 Blackout, which has some high performance out to some certain ranges, right?
Yeah.
The 300 Blackout supersonic ammo really starts to die off somewhere around 100, maybe 200, depending on your specifics. The 338 arc is going to operate at similar velocities, a little bit slower, but that increased diameter means that you get significantly more energy on target than 300 Blackout supersonic. And from a wound channel perspective, like the 175 grain hollow point, I think it'll be a really good application for varmints or pigs or stuff like that. I think you'll see that it puts animals down quite a bit faster than the 300 Blackout supersonic.
Yep. And it is flatter trajectory. So where range estimation can be a little bit difficult, say at night, It's going to be helpful there, banging steel out on a dynamic range where you got steel kind of all over. It'll flatten it out there as well. And again, add some variety so that you're not married to just one ammo offering. You've got a couple.
Yeah. And, kind of to blend supersonic with 8.6 blackout, there's going to be a lot of people out there that have an 8.6 blackout right now.
Yeah.
And from a supersonic performance, the 8.6 blackout is going to give you more performance than the 338 ARC.
It's the better mousetrap.
Yeah, it has more cartridge case capacity. You can push bullets faster. But I think if you really go look at it and you run the ballistic calculators on it, you'll see that I don't know as though it's better enough for me to go for it.
Yeah.
Especially when you have the trade-offs that exist with it.
Awesome. Well, from a terminal performance standpoint, one of the things that Joe coined this, and I've been using to tell people when they ask about, okay, what can I use this for? Joe likened it to a 44 Magnum. If you feel comfortable shooting an animal with a 44 mag, which has been historically fantastic for a lot of hunting, then go ahead and shoot the 338 ARC Sub X. So black bears, deer, antelope, obviously pig. I mean, there's a bunch of animals in that window that if you shoot a 240 grain hollow point 44 mag, you could take that 338 ARC and it's going to fit that same problem set and it's going to do a good job at it. You think that's an accurate description?
100% agree. Yeah. And with the 307, you're going to see penetration depth somewhere on the order of, 16 to 20 inches, depending on, the specifics of the animal or whatever. So that's absolutely sufficient for white-tailed deer, antelope, black bear, a bunch of stuff like you said. So I would not be, where I would be hesitant to use subsonic 300 blackout on animals like that, I would not hesitate with the 338.
Right. One of the cool things also, we talked about this being an AR-15, you got to look at your regulations. You got to look.
I was going to bring that up.
You have to look at the areas you're hunting, the game you're hunting, what the requirements are. And I'm going to use Nebraska for example. So there's a certain energy requirement out of a rifle, and then there's a different energy requirement out of a pistol. Well, because this is an AR-15 or fits in an AR-15 cartridge, well, the 338 ARC doesn't meet the somewhat archaic rules for rifle use in Nebraska on a deer. Throw that thing in a 10.5-inch pistol, AR pistol, you're well within the rules, and it's going to be just as effective because I would like to hear your comments on this, but in my experience, with these subsonic cartridges in our subsonic line, you really don't see a whole lot of velocity gain or loss due to barrel loss or gain. So if it's 1050 out of a 16-inch, very likely going to be 1050 out of an 18, 14, and an 11. So you can do an AR pistol, skirt the rules, and really benefit from the quiet, low recoil subsonic performance, which is great for, if you're in an enclosed blind or if you're hunting with youth or if you just like a super quiet experience. It's just an awesome fit. So I wanted to mention that being in an AR, you can do an AR pistol and find yourself in a pretty good spot as far as the legality goes to use this on deer and antelope.
Yeah, this is well suited for shorter barrel lengths too. I looked at some radar data before I came up here, and we shot the subsonic and the supersonic load out of a 16-inch, a 12-inch, and a 7-inch barrel. These were all in like a bolt gun configuration. The subsonic lost an average of 5 feet per second per inch. So not much. You can go from 16 inches to 6 inches and you lose 50 foot per second. Yeah. So not a ton, right? You're going to see that. You're going to see that difference exist barrel to barrel to barrel.
Right.
Now the supersonic load lost the average 30 foot per second per inch. So kind of what you expect.
Yeah, 25 to 30. It's interesting, tangential. Interesting though that in the supersonic world, it's 25 or 30 feet per second per inch. If that's a 300 PRC or in this case, a 338 ARC. It's weird that in the supersonic world, the velocity loss per inch of barrel is almost always 25 or 30 feet per second. You'd think big magnum, slow burning propellant, 26-inch barrels, that it would be substantial. And then you'd think, like little Pipsqueak 6 ARC, it wouldn't be so bad, but it's virtually identical. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how that works out.
I think the bullet knows it's being shot out of a rifle, so it slows itself down at 30 feet per second per inch.
Right, maybe. Well, guys, I'm obviously excited about the launch of this cartridge. In the months leading up to when this podcast release, you guys have all worked with a bunch of gun and barrel companies in the industry, so that when we announce it, when we get this out to the world, that it's ready to go. There are products on the shelf for the user to go buy, and the resounding answer from all the companies I've partnered with, it's just been, oh, yes, yes,
We're
yes,
in.
yes.
We're in.
Or maybe it doesn't fit our product lineup, but we're going to build some anyway, just to play around with it and see if we can make it fit somewhere. Because I think people see the value of what this cartridge can do, the problems that it fixes, not to mention, the DOD and potential law enforcement potential that it has as well. I think the future is bright for the ARC family, specifically 338 ARC. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, it's really weird to think that this is a 2025 new product and it was designed in 2016, 2017 timeframe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad we waited, though.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that before on other podcasts, where when the timing is right, if we have something on the shelf, we'll go back and dig it out and refine it. And I mean, we've done that before.
Mhm.
So
Well, the timing was right.
Yeah. Yeah. One more plug I'd like to make, or maybe just something for the listener to think about, is don't think that you have to have a 338 rifle can to use this cartridge. You may need that, but a lot of pistol cans will work with it.
9mm.
Yeah, I have a Thunder Beast Fly 9, and you go to the manufacturer's website, and they'll kind of give you usually the minimum recommended barrel length for a certain cartridge, or some sort of specification as to what their can is designed to handle. And I'm going to run that. I'm not planning on going and getting a 338 can.
Yeah.
All my cans are 30 cal.
Yeah, right. So the 9mm cans, the 45 cans, the 46s.
Yep.
Yep.
A lot of those modular hybrid designs out there. Yeah. So
Yeah.
don't think you have to get, to your point, the 1 foot long, 2-inch diameter old 338 can to be able to shoot this subsonic.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, the little Thunder Beast, little Fly 9, and then there's a bunch of others out there as well.
Yeah. Especially if you're shooting subload.
Yeah.
Do yourself a favor. Get the 338 ARC, shoot the subsonic load, and get yourself a suppressor to go with it. Return times. We've had people order it on
lately.
Monday, and they're back on Friday.
Yes.
So
Now's
go
the
ahead
time
and do
to
that.
get one.
Yeah,
Good.
get
That's
that
the truth.
coming. I'm telling you, it's you'll find very few things that are this fun to shoot.
Yeah. Especially with like kids too. It's such a great intro for them because they're not getting beat up with recoil. There's not this crazy loud boom and big flash.
Mhm.
And they can sit there and shoot it all day long. It's so much fun.
And then
And
they can use that same platform to go shoot a deer.
Then go shoot deer. And the feedback, right?
Yeah.
Ding.
Oh,
when they
yeah.
hit.
Oh yeah,
I got it. I hit it.
like you hit it with a sledgehammer.
Exactly.
Well, when you were kind of opening with talking about shooting steel targets at the range, up at that one range we have those big kind of MGM silhouette style targets that are hanging from T-posts. And I bet that target weighs probably 50 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
And you hit it with a 300 blackout at 2 or 3, 400, because we'll shoot subsonic out to 600 or 700.
Yeah, which is a blast.
It's so much fun. But let's say at 400 yards, you hit that thing with a 300 blackout. You get an audible ting. You can see the plate wiggle a little bit. Like, it's impressive what that thing, how much energy it'll put onto that target. You hit it with the 307 sub X, and it's like the Gong Show. Do you remember that? Back in the day? TV Land, the Gong Show?
Yeah.
And that target swings. Like, it's a big difference.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to get out and use it this fall, get it on more media events, get it on more hunts. Hopefully you guys get a chance to get your kids out on it, get some animals laid down with it. Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with about the 338 ARC, its design, and its intent?
Nope. Go get one and have fun. Shoot it. Try it
Absolutely. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, get one, have fun, and let us know what you think. All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks.
Everyone, thank you for tuning in to this episode about the design of the 338 Advanced Rifle Cartridge. Like Joe said, go get one, have a ton of fun. Let us know what you think. We appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next one.